My teacher's funny lesson. Have you ever had a teacher who changed your life in the most unexpected way? A teacher who made you laugh so hard you couldn't breathe, but also taught you lessons you'll never forget. Today's story will take you on an unforgettable journey with one of the funniest, most peculiar teachers you'll ever meet. Subscribe to Story Driven English now to never miss our weekly stories that will improve your English while entertaining you. My name is Alex, and I was never a fan of school. Each morning, I would drag myself out of bed, silently counting the hours until I could return home. My grades were average at best, and I had accepted that school was simply something I had to endure rather than enjoy. That all changed during my final year of high school, when Mr. Jenkins walked into our classroom. On the first day of the new school year, we sat quietly waiting for our new English teacher. The principal had mentioned that we were getting someone special this year, but in school language, that usually meant someone strict and boring. The door swung open, and in walked a tall, thin man with wild gray hair that stuck out in all directions. He wore bright yellow pants, a blue polka-dot shirt, and most shocking of all, two completely different shoes. One brown leather shoe on his right foot, and a red sneaker on his left. "Good morning, future world changers," he announced with a theatrical bow. The entire class exchanged confused glances. Was this really our teacher, or some kind of prank? "My name is Mr. Jenkins, and I will be your English teacher this year. But more importantly, I will be your guide to understanding the magnificent power of words." He spun around dramatically, nearly knocking over the trash can. That's when we noticed something even stranger. Every time Mr. Jenkins moved, his pockets made jingling sounds, as he wrote his name on the blackboard. At least a dozen small objects fell from his pockets. Paper clips, small rubber ducks, marbles, and what appeared to be a miniature plastic dinosaur. "Oops," he laughed, not the least bit embarrassed. "My pocket friends always try to escape during introductions. They're shy, you see." Instead of picking up the items, he left them scattered across the floor, and continued, as if nothing unusual had happened. We were all now sitting upright in our chairs, unsure whether to laugh or be concerned. "Before we begin our magnificent journey into the world of English literature," Mr. Jenkins announced, "I need to know who you are. But please," he raised a finger dramatically, "do not tell me your names. Names are boring. Instead, tell me your favorite word in the English language and why you love it." The classroom fell silent. In all my years of school, no teacher had ever asked us about our favorite words. Most of us hadn't even considered having a favorite word. "I'll start," said Mr. Jenkins, closing his eyes as if in deep meditation. "My favorite word is serendipity. It sounds like music when you say it. -ser-n-dip-i-tie-. And it means finding wonderful things you weren't looking for. Like when you're searching for your lost sock, but instead find money you forgot in your pocket. That's serendipity, and that's how I live my life." He pointed to a girl in the front row, who nervously said her favorite word was bubble, because it sounded fun to say. Mr. Jenkins clapped enthusiastically, as if she had just solved a complex mathematical equation. Then he moved to the next student, and the next, until everyone had shared a word. Everyone except me. When it was my turn, I froze. I hadn't been paying attention to what others had said, because I was too busy wondering if our principal had accidentally hired a circus performer instead of a teacher. I don't have a favorite word," I admitted. Mr. Jenkins gasped so dramatically that several students jumped in their seats. He clutched his chest as if I had stabbed him. "No favorite word? My dear child, this is a tragedy of the highest order." He paced back and forth, the objects in his pockets jingling with each step. "Everyone must have a favorite word. Words are the colors we use to paint our thoughts, the music that dances through our conversations." He stopped suddenly and stared at me. "Your homework, young scholars, is yours, not the class's, to find your favorite word by tomorrow. Test words in your mouth like you're tasting different flavors of ice cream. Listen to how they sound. Feel how they roll off your tongue. When you find the right one, you'll know." I nodded, feeling a mix of embarrassment and intrigue. No teacher had ever given me such a strange assignment before. For the rest of that first class, Mr. Jenkins didn't open a textbook or hand out a syllabus. Instead, he told us stories, wild, imaginative tales about his travels around the world. He claimed to have had tea with the Queen of England, who apparently preferred chocolate cookies over traditional biscuits, sailed across the Atlantic in a boat made of recycled plastic bottles, and lived with pandas in China for 3 months. To understand their perspective on bamboo literature, we couldn't tell if any of his stories were true, but it didn't seem to matter. For the first time in my school life, I found myself disappointed when the bell rang. That evening, I sat in my room staring at the ceiling, thinking about favorite words. It seemed like such a silly assignment, yet I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tested words like Mr. Jenkins suggested: mountain, whisper, chocolate, dream. None of them felt special enough. Just before falling asleep, a word popped into my head: possibility. I liked how it sounded, how it felt hopeful, and how it contained the word possible inside it, reminding me that most things in life were achievable if you tried. It wasn't as fancy as serendipity, but it felt right the next day. I eagerly waited for Mr. Jenkins to ask about my homework. He walked in wearing a normal suit this time, but with a tie that displayed glowing Christmas lights in September. The class groaned collectively when he announced a pop quiz, but it wasn't like any quiz we'd ever taken. Question 1. He read aloud, while perching on his desk rather than sitting in his chair. If you could have a conversation with any punctuation mark, which would it be, and what would you discuss? The questions grew increasingly bizarre. If the letter Q decided to quit the alphabet, how would you convince it to stay? Write a haiku. From the perspective of a comma, that's been overused. If words could feel emotions, how would the word moist feel about being disliked by so many people? We couldn't help but laugh as we wrote our answers. Was this really English class? Were we actually learning anything? Yet somehow, these strange questions made us think deeply about language in ways we never had before. When Mr. Jenkins collected our papers, he turned to me with an expectant look. And your favorite word, Alex, did you discover it? Possibility, I said, feeling strangely proud. His face lit up like I had just announced I'd discovered a new planet. Excellent choice. A word that opens doors in the mind. A word that refuses to accept limitations. He did a little dance that made the whole class erupt in laughter. As the weeks passed, Mr. Jenkins' lessons grew even more unconventional. One day he brought in a collection of unusual musical instruments from around the world and had us read poetry while playing them, insisting that words have their own music, and sometimes they need accompaniment. Another day, he came to class, dressed as William Shakespeare, complete with a rough collar and pointed beard, and stayed in character the entire time, addressing us in Elizabethan English and feigning confusion at modern objects like the classroom computer. What sorcery is this glowing box? Closing parenthesis. For our lesson on descriptive writing, he blindfolded us and had us touch, smell, and taste various objects, all safe and mostly food items. Then write about the experience, without revealing what the item was. My description of touching a pineapple was so vivid that he read it aloud to the class, marking the first time any teacher had ever highlighted my work. But Mr. Jenkins' most memorable lesson came about halfway through the semester. We arrived in class to find the desks pushed against the walls and a large plastic kiddie pool in the center of the room. The pool was filled with what looked like thousands of Scrabble letter tiles. Today, Mr. Jenkins announced, wearing fishing waders and holding a small net, like the kind used for aquariums, we are going word fishing. He explained that each of us would take turns closing our eyes, reaching into the pool of letters, and grabbing exactly 7 tiles. Then, we would have to create a story on the spot, using words that could be made only from those 7 letters. But, Mr. Jenkins, protested Rachel, one of the more serious students, what does this have to do with our curriculum? We have exams coming up. Mr. Jenkins looked at her thoughtfully. My dear future literary genius, the ability to think creatively under constraints is precisely what will set you apart in those exams. Anyone can write when given unlimited choices. True mastery comes from creating something meaningful with limited resources. When my turn came, I nervously plunged my hand into the pool of letters and pulled out a E, D, I, N, R, and S. My mind raced as I tried to form words. Raises, dines, ends, ride, near, side. Begin your tale, Mr. Jenkins commanded with a flourish of his net. I started shakily. A rider named Erin rides near a riverside. She ends her ride as rain begins. Erin sends a... I struggled to find another word. Time's up, announced Mr. Jenkins after 30 seconds. Wonderful effort. Notice how your brain had to work differently. That's the beauty of constraints. They force new neural pathways. This strange exercise continued for the entire class, with some students creating hilarious mini-stories, and others barely forming sentences. But everyone was engaged, everyone was thinking, and most surprisingly, everyone was having fun. Even Rachel, who had initially protested, laughed until tears streamed down her face when she had to create a story with the letters B, F, I, M, O, R, and T. After the word fishing activity, Mr. Jenkins had us sit in a circle on the floor, ignoring the perfectly good desks, pushed against the walls and reflect on the experience. Words are alive, he said, suddenly serious for once. They breathe, they dance, they fight, they make peace. The difference between saying, I'm fine, when you're truly fine, and saying, I'm fine, when you're falling apart inside. That's the power of context, tone, history. Same words, completely different meanings. He looked around at each of us. Many of your regular teachers focus on getting you to memorize rules and structures. Important, yes. But rules without understanding the living essence of language is like learning all the parts of a bicycle without ever experiencing the joy of riding it. Something about that statement resonated deeply with me. All these years, I had approached English class as a set of grammar rules to memorize, essays to write according to rigid formulas, and books to analyze based on what I thought the teacher wanted to hear. Mr. Jenkins was showing us something entirely different: the playfulness, the power, and the pure joy of language. The following week, Mr. Jenkins didn't show up for class. Instead, a stern-looking substitute teacher entered, introduced herself as Ms. Harrington, and informed us that she would be following Mr. Jenkins' lesson plan in his absence. Please take out your textbooks and turn to page 94, she instructed. We all looked at each other in confusion. Mr. Jenkins had never once asked us to use our textbooks. In fact, on the first day, he had called them creativity coffins and suggested we use them as doorstops. Is there a problem? Ms. Harrington asked, noticing our hesitation. Mr. Jenkins doesn't really use the textbooks, explained Lisa from the back row. Ms. Harrington's eyebrows shot up. Well, according to the curriculum outline I received, you should be covering comparative literature this week, specifically focusing on themes of identity in modern novels. This sounded nothing like Mr. Jenkins' teaching style. We reluctantly pulled out our dusty textbooks and began the dull reading assignment Ms. Harrington had written on the board. 5 minutes before the end of class, the door burst open, and Mr. Jenkins tumbled in, literally tumbled, as in a somersault, followed by a dramatic pose with his arms outstretched. He was dressed normally for once, but his hair was even wilder than usual, and he was breathing heavily, as if he had run all the way to school. So sorry for my tardiness, Ms. Harrington, he exclaimed. My car was hijacked by a family of raccoons this morning. Terribly clever creatures. They managed to hotwire it while I was getting coffee. Had to chase them for miles. They're surprisingly good drivers for having such small paws. Ms. Harrington stared at him with an expression that perfectly balanced shock and disbelief. Mr. Jenkins, I've nearly completed your lesson for today. The students are analyzing the text as instructed in your curriculum guide. Mr. Jenkins looked genuinely confused. He approached Ms. Harrington and glanced at the papers on the desk. Oh dear, he whispered, but still loud enough for the front row to hear. You've found my decoy curriculum. The one I submit to appease the educational bureaucracy demons. Ms. Harrington's face flushed red. I beg your pardon. Don't worry about it, Mr. Jenkins said cheerfully, patting her shoulder. You've done a splendid job. I'll take it from here for the last few minutes. After a frosty exchange that the entire class pretended not to hear, Ms. Harrington gathered her belongings and left. The moment the door closed behind her, Mr. Jenkins leapt onto his desk. Put those textbooks away immediately. They're emitting dangerous levels of boredom radiation. Quick, before it's too late. The class erupted in laughter as we gladly shoved the books back into our bags. Now, said Mr. Jenkins, still standing on his desk, since we have only a few minutes left, I want you all to do something important. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of small, colorful, sticky notes, which he proceeded to toss into the air like confetti. Take one of these. Write down the most surprising thing you've learned in this class so far, not about English, but about yourself. As the bell rang and students filed out, placing their sticky notes on the door as instructed, I found myself lingering. I hadn't finished writing my note yet because I couldn't decide what to put down. Mr. Jenkins noticed my hesitation. Stuck, Alex, kind of, I admitted. I'm not sure what I've learned about myself. Mr. Jenkins smiled. Not his usual theatrical grin, but something smaller and more genuine. Sometimes the most important lessons take time to reveal themselves. No rush. Over the next month, Mr. Jenkins' lessons grew increasingly elaborate. For a unit on persuasive writing, he divided the class into 2 groups and had us debate whether pineapple belonged on pizza butt with a twist. Halfway through, he made each side switch positions and argue the opposite view just as convincingly. The mark of true understanding, he explained, is being able to see all sides of an argument, even ones you disagree with. For our lesson on tone and mood, he brought in a collection of masks representing different emotions and had us read the same passage while wearing different masks, demonstrating how the same words could convey drastically different meanings, depending on how they were delivered. And for our study of Romeo and Juliet, rather than having us read the play silently at our desks, he assigned each student a character and had us act out scenes with modernized dialogue that he had rewritten to include current slang and references. Juliet's famous "Wherefore art thou, Romeo?" became "Why did you have to be a Montague? Couldn't you be from literally any other family? So unfair." The whole class was in stitches, but surprisingly, I found myself understanding Shakespeare's themes better than I ever had before. But it wasn't all fun and games. Beneath the eccentric activities and constant humor, Mr. Jenkins was teaching us more than any teacher I'd ever had. I found myself thinking critically, writing more expressively, and actually enjoying the process of crafting words. My grades began to improve, not just in English, but in all my subjects. Something about Mr. Jenkins' approach had awakened my curiosity, and I found myself more engaged in learning overall. One day in late November, Mr. Jenkins walked into class looking uncharacteristically serious. His clothes were normal, his hair was combed, and his pockets didn't jingle. The class fell silent immediately, sensing something was wrong. "My brilliant young scholars," he began quietly, "I received some feedback from the school administration yesterday. It seems that some parents have expressed concern about my ... unconventional teaching methods." The class erupted in protests, but Mr. Jenkins raised his hand for silence. "While I appreciate your support, I understand their concerns. Education is a serious business, and as your teacher, I have a responsibility to ensure you're prepared for your exams and future academic endeavors." He sighed deeply before continuing. "So, starting today, we will be adjusting our approach. Please open your textbooks to page 127. A collective groan filled the classroom as we reluctantly pulled out our textbooks. For the next 40 minutes, Mr. Jenkins delivered the most conventional, by-the-book English lesson imaginable. He had us read passages silently, answer the questions at the end of the chapter, and write definitions of literary terms. No jokes, no stories, no bizarre activities, just straight, traditional teaching. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense. Students exchanged confused glances, some looking bored, others disappointed. I found myself watching the clock, counting the minutes until the end of class, something I hadn't done in Mr. Jenkins' class since that very first day. With 5 minutes remaining, Mr. Jenkins closed his book and surveyed the silent classroom. "So," he said flatly, "how did you find today's lesson?" No one spoke. Finally, Rachel, the same student who had initially questioned the word fishing activity, raised her hand. "It was terrible, Mr. Jenkins," she said bluntly. "I didn't learn anything. I read the words and wrote the answers, but nothing stuck." Other students began to voice their agreement. "I almost fell asleep," admitted Tyler from the back row. "I kept waiting for the twist or the fun part," said Lisa. "It never came." Mr. Jenkins nodded thoughtfully, and then, slowly, a familiar mischievous smile spread across his face. "Would you say that you miss my unusual teaching style?" "Yes." The class responded in unison. Mr. Jenkins leaped onto his desk, suddenly energized. "Excellent. That was your lesson for today. The power of engagement." He pulled a small video camera from his drawer. "I've recorded this entire class session. The glazed eyes, the slumped shoulders, the clock watching. This, my friends, is Exhibit A in my defense to the school board tomorrow evening." He jumped down and paced excitedly. "You see, education isn't just about transferring information from textbooks to your brains. It's about igniting curiosity, fostering critical thinking, and yes, having fun in the process. When you enjoy learning, you remember more, you think more deeply, and you apply knowledge more effectively." The bell rang, but no one moved to leave. "Your homework," Mr. Jenkins continued, "should you choose to accept it, is to write one paragraph explaining what you value about our usual class approach. If you'd like to support my case to the school board, I'll be presenting at their meeting tomorrow at 7 p.m. The next evening, I found myself walking into the school board meeting alongside at least 15 of my classmates. We hadn't planned to come together. Each of us had decided independently that we needed to speak up for Mr. Jenkins. The meeting was already underway when we arrived. A group of parents was expressing concerns about Mr. Jenkins' methods, using phrases like lack of structure, insufficient exam preparation, and unsuitable behavior for a professional educator. Principal Watson was trying to mediate, acknowledging the parents' concerns while also noting that Mr. Jenkins' students had shown improved engagement and preliminary test scores. Mr. Jenkins himself sat quietly aside, so unusual that it was almost disturbing. The wild-haired, perpetually animated teacher looked small and subdued in his chair. When it came time for Mr. Jenkins to respond, he stood slowly and cleared his throat. But before he could speak, Rachel stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said confidently, "but we'd like to say something first." The board members looked surprised but nodded their permission. One by one, my classmates spoke about how Mr. Jenkins had transformed their relationship with learning. Tyler, who had struggled with reading comprehension, explained how the theatrical approach to literature had helped him visualize and understand complex texts. Lisa described how she had always been too shy to speak in class until Mr. Jenkins' supportive environment helped her find her voice. Others shared similar stories of academic improvement and newfound enthusiasm for education. When my turn came, I took a deep breath. Before Mr. Jenkins' class, I saw school as something to endure, not enjoy. I did the minimum required work and counted the minutes until I could leave. But now, I actually look forward to English class. I think about words differently. I read more in my free time. I even started writing for fun, something I never imagined doing before. I pulled out a folded piece of paper from my pocket. This is my latest vocabulary test from Mr. Jenkins' class. It's the first perfect score I've ever received in English. I handed it to the nearest board member. But the grade isn't what matters. What matters is that I studied for this test. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That's what Mr. Jenkins does. He makes you want to learn. After we had all spoken, there was a moment of silence in the room. Then Mr. Jenkins stood, his eyes suspiciously moist. I had prepared a long, somewhat dramatic defense involving statistical data, pedagogical theory, and possibly an interpretive dance, he said with a small smile. But my students have said everything that matters. My teaching methods may seem strange, even foolish at times, but they come from a deep belief that learning should be joyful, meaningful, and memorable. He turned to face the parents directly. I understand your concerns. You want to ensure your children receive a quality education that prepares them for their future. So do I. I simply believe that the path to that goal can be both rigorous and enjoyable. After much discussion, the school board reached a compromise. Mr. Jenkins could continue his creative teaching approach, provided that he documented how each activity aligned with curriculum standards and regularly assessed student progress through conventional measures to ensure no one fell behind. The next day, Mr. Jenkins bounded into class wearing a superhero cape with Captain Curriculum emblazoned on the back. "Victory, my valiant vocabulary warriors," he announced, performing a dramatic bow. "Thanks to your eloquent testimonials, our literary adventures shall continue." The room erupted in cheers and applause. However, he added, once the noise died down, "I have made a solemn vow to our educational overseers that I shall provide tangible evidence of your learning. So, ... He reached into a large bag and pulled out what looked like colorful construction hats, with small digital counters attached to the top. "Welcome to today's lesson, vocabulary minors." For the next hour, we wore the ridiculous hats which counted how many vocabulary words from our current unit we used correctly in conversation, while engaging in a complex role-playing scenario about establishing a colony on Mars. Somehow, Mr. Jenkins had managed to transform even standardized assessment into something creative and engaging. As the semester progressed, I found myself changing in unexpected ways. I began to participate more actively in all my classes, to approach problems with creativity rather than frustration, and even to use some of Mr. Jenkins' techniques when helping my younger sister with her homework. The final project for Mr. Jenkins' class was deceptively simple: create anything that demonstrated what we had learned about the power of language. The only requirements were that it had to incorporate at least 15 vocabulary words from throughout the semester, and had to be presented to the class. Some students wrote songs or poems. Others created short films or comic books. Rachel, who had become one of Mr. Jenkins' most enthusiastic supporters, designed an elaborate escape room with language puzzles. For my project, I decided to write a speech, not a standard academic essay, but an actual speech meant to be delivered aloud. The topic: how words change worlds. I spent weeks researching, writing, and practicing. incorporating everything Mr. Jenkins had taught us about rhythm, emphasis, emotional impact, and persuasive techniques. On the day of presentations, I was terrified, but also strangely excited. When my turn came, I walked to the front of the room, took a deep breath, and began. For 5 minutes, I spoke about how language shapes our perception of reality, how the words we choose can build bridges or walls between people, and how mastering language gives us the power to change not only our own lives, but the lives of others. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before the class erupted in applause. Mr. Jenkins was beaming with pride, and for the first time in my academic life, I felt like I had truly accomplished something meaningful, not for a grade, but for myself. After all the presentations were complete, Mr. Jenkins addressed the class one last time before the semester ended. My brilliant, creative, occasionally bewildered students. He began with his usual dramatic flair. When you first walked into this classroom, many of you saw English as nothing more than a subject to pass, a collection of rules to memorize, and boxes to check. Now, I hope you see it as what it truly is, a doorway to infinite possibilities. He reached into his pocket, causing several small rubber ducks to fall out in the process, and pulled out a stack of envelopes. I have written each of you a letter, highlighting the unique gifts you've brought to our classroom community, and the growth I've witnessed in you. These are not grades or evaluations, they are words from my heart to yours. As he distributed the envelopes, he continued speaking. Language is the most powerful tool humans have ever created. With words, we can inspire movements, comfort the grieving, express the inexpressible, and connect across vast differences. Remember this power, use it wisely, and never stop playing with words, for in that play, you'll discover their deepest magic. I opened my envelope after class, finding a handwritten letter that brought tears to my eyes. Mr. Jenkins had noticed aspects of my thinking and growth that I hadn't even recognized myself. At the bottom, he had written, "Your favorite word was possibility. How fitting. You have shown me that your possibilities are endless." Years later, when people ask me about my favorite teacher, I always tell them about Mr. Jenkins and his funny lessons. I tell them about word fishing and vocabulary minors, about Shakespeare in modern slang, and debate competitions about pizza toppings. I tell them about a classroom where learning felt like play, and where a strange man with wild hair and jingling pockets taught me not just about English, but about myself. Most importantly, I tell them how Mr. Jenkins showed us that the most powerful lessons often come disguised as laughter, and that sometimes the funniest teacher can leave the most serious impact on your life. Did you enjoy my teacher's funny lesson? If this story helped you improve your English while entertaining you, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends who are learning English, and leave a comment below telling us about your favorite teacher. Subscribe to Story-Driven English for more engaging stories that make learning English fun and effective. New stories every week that will help you build your vocabulary and improve your listening skills while enjoying incredible tales. Hit that subscribe button now. Key vocabulary repeated throughout. Unconventional, different from what is usually done or believed. Elaborate, involving many carefully arranged parts or details. Theatrical, relating to or characteristic of theater or acting. Engagement, to attract and hold attention or interest. Curriculum, the subjects comprising a course of study. Perspective, a particular way of viewing things. Conventional, based on or in accordance with what is generally done. Eloquent, fluent, or persuasive in speaking or writing. Compromise, an agreement reached by each side making concessions. Transform, to change completely in form or appearance. Perceive, perception, to become aware of through the senses. Enthusiasm, strong excitement or interest in something. Technique, a way of carrying out a particular task. Impact, a strong effect or influence. Approach, a way of dealing with something. Creativity, the use of imagination to create something. Genuine, truly what something is said to be. Authentic, memorable, worth remembering or is remembered. Rigorous, extremely thorough and careful. Joyful, feeling, expressing or causing great pleasure and happiness.